Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on the time zone that you are joining us from. My name is Mohit. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and I welcome you all to this Bangalore developer group, Modern App Development on Salesforce. So if you look at my title, right, we are not speaking about any specific topic today. Instead, we are basically, this will be our talk, which is gonna. I hope that this is gonna enlighten you to understand where we are in terms of developer experience at Salesforce, and in next few years, where are we headed, and also what are some of the skills that you need to have as a developer. And I also have a small demo to show you, like, okay, how flexible and how scalable applications we can build on Salesforce. We're going to use an application called eCars, which is an open source application that the developer advocacy team here at Salesforce built it. Of course, not myself. There were a lot of other people who built it, but I have been maintaining that application and also exploring that application. So I'll show you that application. The code is open source, so we can take a look at some of the code. But if you look at the title here, right, which says build scalable apps faster, right? So that's the aim at Salesforce is we want to empower developers so that they can not only build scalable apps, but they can do it at the speed. And why I'm specifying faster is because that's the need of an hour today, considering the world we are living in from like past 1 year. It has changed so much. And you not only need technology to like work for you, but you want to make that happen faster, right? This is called digital transformation, and we are all in that journey. And Salesforce applications, the Salesforce technology that we have, right, enable you to scale your applications faster, right? So what is modern? So in one word, if I define, okay, what is modern app development on Salesforce? It is building scalable application faster on Salesforce, using the technology that Salesforce provides, like combination of two. There are 3-4 technologies, but I'm going to mention only two. That is Salesforce Core, that you all know today. A lot of you know because you build Salesforce applications, right? You define your custom objects, you write your page layouts, or you write Apex code. So that is one part of it, one part of the story, which we call it as Salesforce Core. And there is this other part of the story which a lot of you have not explored, and I'm going to basically motivate to explore that aspect of Salesforce, which some of you might know. It's called Heroku, and I started exploring myself Heroku in like a year ago, and I'm so much amazed at the power that it has, and the power that you get by combining both Salesforce and Heroku. If you mix both of them, really, sky is the limit. Like, you can really build some really powerful applications faster. So that's modern app development. It is patterns, combination of Salesforce and Heroku to build a really scalable applications. Okay, so a little bit of forward-looking statement here. Now, I might, because I work as a developer advocate, we have access to some information that might not be public. And if my tongue slip and I make something that is forward-looking, note that you should not make your purchasing decision based on something that is forward-looking. Although this talk will be more around developers and developer tooling and all the developer related technology, we should be quite good here. I'm going to speak very generally, and not going into any specific product. Okay, so for those of you who know Salesforce, right, take a look at this slide. And the reason why I put together, or basically took this slide from our team is, uh, you don't realize, like, how much Salesforce actually gives you, right? If you try to build an application today, in any other technology, you will see that there's a lot of work that you have to make, to make your application sort of working. Like, for example, you need infrastructure services, you need network services, and note that it's just not about standing an infrastructure, right? Like, you can use AWS and stand it up, but it has to be secure. Like, how do you make sure that it's secure? It has to be certified, it has to be compliant, right? So all those things are are sort of taken care by Salesforce, right? So that's the advantage. I just put together a slide so that you understand that with Salesforce, right, we have all of these layers baked into it. Like, for example, single sign-on. You have two-factor authentication for security. We have roles and permissions so that we can have an application security just by clicks. And then we have enhanced security. Using the platform encryption, event monitoring, audit trailing, encryption of data at rest, right? Or encrypting data, or masking the data for your testing, right? So there are a lot of features and functionalities. I mean, countless features and functionalities. So that's why you are not like creating everything from the scratch. You're just working through that layer. So that I just put together the slide so that it's easier. Now let's compare back this to what Heroku kind of gives. Now, Heroku also gives you the same things, except I want you to pay attention to one specific aspect of it, which is scaling. Okay. So what is scaling, right? So today, if you are an experienced developer on Salesforce platform, right, you know that you can hit the limits on Salesforce very easily. Like, let's say you're writing a trigger on a lead object, right? You wrote your first trigger, all happy, everything is working. Probably you would have put a for loop inside. You would have put a DML or a SOCL inside for loop. You realized it. You learned the best practices of Apex. Okay, let's just inline the query or move the query out of for loop, or let's say move that insert out of for loop. You got some more, CPU time. You wrote your second process. You wrote your third process. Business kept asking you for more processes, right? At one point, okay, so now there is also this thing called, okay, you explored that, or your business explored that there is an App Exchange product they would like to install, and it works with the lead object. It has more triggers. Let's add it. And more business process, more code that you wrote. At one point, you are like, okay, I have a Gartner limit, that is CPU time exceeded. How many of you have got like CPU time exceeded limits in your application, right? And then you start like optimizing. Okay, how do I optimize this? But the reality is Salesforce only gives you 10 seconds of that CPU time execution. And after that, I mean, you can move your process. You can change some of the process to asynchronous, things like that, and get some more scalability, right? But the moment your data volume also grows, your processes grow, you are at that point where you will hit one of those limits. Either you'll try to save. Some of you might be smart, and you're like, okay, let me reduce the number of queries, and you're gonna hit CPU limit. You'll be like, okay, let's balance the CPU limit. You will hit what do you call another error, like heap size. Now you will say that, okay, let's reduce the heap size. For that, let me add more SOCL. You'll hit the SOCL limit, right? So there are limits everywhere, and the reality is you can only put only so many processes in an object, and after that, you are bound to one of those limits of Salesforce, right? And that's where I started exploring Heroku, because one of the thing about Heroku that differentiates from Salesforce is multi-tenant architecture, okay? Meaning all the resources are sort of shared across various different customers, and that's why we have the limits in place. All good, right? But Heroku is not. Heroku is not multi-tenant. Heroku is an elastic runtime. Heroku has elastic runtime. So pay attention to this word, elastic runtime, meaning the elasticity, right? It has the elasticity. So let's say a process takes 10 seconds, and you are like, okay, no, I want 20 seconds. You have that capability in Heroku. You have that slider to say, okay, I want my process to run for 20 seconds, right? So there is something called horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, and that is what makes this platform really scalable. And that's why I recommend that, if you are trying to scale an application, if you have grown to that extent, right, you should start exploring something like Heroku. Of course, safe harbor functions will come, and that's going to solve a lot of these problems. Safe harbor again. But for today, like for today's relevant technology, right, Heroku is one of the things that you can mix in your application architecture. and really get that vertical scale and horizontal scale. So if you have not heard what is horizontal scale and vertical scale in Heroku, vertical scaling means what you do is you add more, what do you call, computing power to it, right? Or maybe I'm interchanging, but here's the thing, right? So horizontal, right? Vertical. So you're adding more resources. So Heroku has this capability where you can add more resources if you need to process, or to the same resource, you can add more computing power. Okay, so uh, that is what makes this platform. And also, a lot of people ask, okay, if I'm using Heroku, right, am I not like breaking down the compliance and trust that Salesforce actually provides? Like, well, the answer is actually Salesforce Heroku is also compliant. There is this compliant and trust with Heroku Shield, private spaces. You can even make sure that you are running this application within a specific region, or let's say in a specific boundary, like you're running inside a VPN or something. You can do that with Heroku. So Heroku is like powerful. Again, Salesforce is also powerful. You can do a lot of stuff, like, but the moment you want to scale, right, you can actually create a microservice on a Heroku and then just invoke that microservice that can take the data from Salesforce, process it, and reach back into Salesforce without actually storing the data. So like stateless application you can build on Heroku, right? But if you need to cache your data for some reason, right, we have all of these, like data services add-ons, and it has a similar app development workflow. And the best part about Heroku I like is it's multi-language, meaning some of you might know Java, some of you might know Node.js, some of you might know Python. So any of these languages Heroku actually supports. So as long as you learn one language, like I prefer learning Node.js, because it pretty much, it's JavaScript, right? And in Salesforce we are used to writing some sort of JavaScript, at least with Lightning Web Components, right? So with Node.js, right, we can take advantage of Heroku. Now, before I move on, right, is there any questions here? Should we take questions? Let's see. Is there any questions? No video. Was it? Somebody's saying no video, but hopefully, like everyone else.
No, we can see it. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So let's keep discussing, right? So before I move on to demo and see, I want to just help you revise, like, okay, where are we headed, right? If you're still using some of the old technologies that we have, it's definitely a time to move using the latest and greatest tools that Salesforce provides, because because you want to be on the latest, right? And those tools are a lot better than what we used to have like 3-4 years ago. So let's look at some of the tools, and I recommend that you actually go look at each of these, because each of these play a very important role. So the first thing I want to mention is definitely you should know about Oakcliff. Okay, so what is Oakcliff? Oakcliff is an open source framework for building command line tools in Node.js. Now, why I'm specifying Oakcliff is, if you go to oakcliff.io, right, this is an open source, again, maintained by originally Heroku, but now Salesforce, because again, Heroku is part of Salesforce, right? So we lately actually published a blog post, right, about what upgrades we are making to the Oakcliff core. So Oakcliff is essentially a Node.js open source project. Like, you can go to the GitHub and you can actually see the open source project. You don't have to actually worry about the code that is there here, but all that you need to do is understand how to use Oakcliff. Now, why Oakcliff is important is because Salesforce CLI, a lot of you might be using Salesforce CLI, but if not, I strongly recommend that you get familiar with the Salesforce CLI, because you can do a lot more with it. It's a command line tool. I know that as a Salesforce developer, we're always used to that UI clicks and points, but last 3-4 years back, we moved to Salesforce CLI because we understood that, as a developers, right, coming from other backgrounds, CLI is something that you're more comfortable with, right? And if you have started your career in Salesforce itself, then you have to spend some time learning about command line utility, etc. But the Salesforce CLI itself is built using this Oakcliff framework. And then we have a Heroku CLI for Heroku application development and management. And Heroku is also built using the same Oak Cliff framework, right? So we are using common framework like Oak Cliff to build this. Now, if you are a service provider, right? If you have a service and you want to build a command line utility for that, then Oak Cliff is your way to go. So you can use Oak Cliff and build it. So again, it's not very specific to Salesforce or Heroku. It's just a framework, right? So these are 3 tools that I would recommend that you actually look at it. And then when it comes to IDE, right? Like, okay, what IDE do you use, right? I use Visual Studio Code because Visual Studio Code today has a marketplace where you can literally find extensions for working on everything. Of course, we have our official extension called Salesforce Extension Pack, but there is nothing stopping you from making your own extension or basically using an extension that a community member have built. And the real benefit of using Visual Studio Code as your editor is that if you're actually working on other languages, let's say Node.js or Java or Python, they have extensions for all of these. So it's like, okay, one single IDE or editor. It's an editor essentially, one single editor, and you're actually using it for everything else. Now, some of you might say that, okay, I'm used to Illuminated Cloud. You feel free to use any IDE of your choice, but like Salesforce official extension pack is only for VS Code today. So if you're using Illuminated Cloud, you need like a third-party plugin or something to go along with it. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
Okay, from Rutika. How do we learn Heroku? Any one-stop solution like that?
Okay, that's a great question. That's a really great question, actually. So if you like, the way I would say to learn Heroku would be to actually go to Heroku documentation. But let me see. So Heroku documentation Node.js. Like, for example, if you want to learn just the Node.js, right? So go to this dev center where it is getting started, and they have a really one like a walkthrough where you can you can basically click on each of them, install Heroku, follow step-by-step instruction, and understand, okay, how is this working. And believe me, it's not so much tough at all. The moment you actually go step by step and actually run something, you really you got used to this actually, because it's pretty simple to learn, except that you need to know the language. Like, I recommend that if you are learning Node, right, learn Node first. Like, try to write like a sample app, like let's say just an Express app, which basically serves a HTTP server or something like that, and then come back to this getting started with Node.js and go one by one step and build the app. And the other thing I would like to point is Heroku also offers free orgs like Salesforce, right? In Salesforce, you can easily sign up. Now you can do that with Heroku as well. So you go and sign up for an account, you get it for free, and then you install your the Heroku CLI, and then you're good to get started. Actually, you can explore yourself. Like, there's nothing stopping you from saying, okay, I cannot play with it because it's all theoretical or it's law, there's no environment for me. All the things are there. Also, we have some trailhead modules on Heroku, like getting started. But to me, what the article that I found really useful is getting started on Heroku with Node.js documentation, because it really shows you how to install. And essentially what you're doing in Heroku is you're just learning how to deploy an application basically on Heroku. That's what you do. Heroku is meant for you write your code and then you just deploy it, and it automatically creates that service for you, like whether it's a web application. I'll show you. We have some Heroku Node.js code and other stuff that we have done in the demo. So when I move to the demo, I'll definitely show you all of them.
Next question. So
Yeah.
Heroku is meant only for computing?
Very good question. So Heroku is just not meant for computing.
Or
It is
do we have
also,
any other use cases? Yes.
that's a very good question. So Heroku is, what do you call it? It's a service, right? It's a you can say it's a platform as a service, or maybe it goes to infrastructure as service. But what you can do with Heroku is you can host a web service. Let's say you are implementing some kind of open source protocol that's not supported in Salesforce. Like, we'll talk about one of the protocols like Mqtt, right? So you can implement those kind of protocols in Node. You can run any language of your choice. You can create web applications with any framework you like. That is the best part. Like, you don't have to be restricted or opinionated to what Salesforce gives you, right? Like Lightning Web Components. Of course, I love Lightning Web Components, but let's say you want to build an application in React.js, or you're building an application in Vue, and you want to host it outside Salesforce, right? Then Heroku is a platform for you to host those web applications and create web services, or create a microservice. Or you can do some really heavy lifting with those add-ons. Like, for example, one of the add-ons you have is Apache Kafka, where you can like stream data into. So there's a lot more things that you can do with Heroku. It's a really powerful tool, and you see all of these languages are actually supported. So it is, Heroku is for, again, building, deploying, and managing your apps.
Okay, so now last question I'll be taking. Heroku has a standalone feature, but in the context of Salesforce, where do we put Heroku in the architecture and the application?
That's a very good question. We'll move on to our next, like the slides, and I'll show you how to combine both of them. So when we go to the demo, we'll show you.
Cool.
Okay, awesome. So the next thing, again, our developer hub, this is a Salesforce feature. I recommend that you explore more about developer hub. You go to developer hub, you basically you can create scratch arcs, which means you have your own environment to build your application. So something to worry about. Now, I wanted to, like, one of the things I wanted to put together the slide is for, object metadata dependency, right? So a lot of you don't understand when you build Salesforce application. It is because we never learned this way. We never learned about dependencies. We know to create objects. We know how to tie all those objects and write SQL queries. We know how to write Apex, but we never think about, how is this all interrelated? So that's why I put together is, in Salesforce world, right? If you create a data model, right? Note that the moment you create the data model, there are so many things that comes with it. Like, for example, page layout, field level security, validation rules that you write has a dependency on that. So it's important to understand the concept of dependency, because, like, the modern application development in Salesforce is all, modular. It's, one of the things that I've learned hard way is the way we build applications on Salesforce, we are built as a monolith. So that's why, the moment you have like thousands of classes on your Apex IDE, your IDE stops working, because, you built as one monolithic gigantic app instead of breaking that into multiple packages, right? So to break that into multiple packages, you need to understand what is dependency, what is dependency injection, things like that. So note that, when you build your objects and write code on top of it, note that the code has a dependency on that object, right? So when you're building packages and stuff like that, right, when you should ideally be now modularizing your application and building in a modular way and not in a monolithic way, if you want to really be agile with your application development. And that's where we have technologies like unlock packages, etc., which you should actually explore. Okay, so let's move on. So these are some of the Heroku add-ons, like Postgres. We have Postgres, and we have Redis. We have Apache Kafka. So what difference is, like, Redis is like a caching layer. Think of it as a platform cache, right? In fact, platform cache is sort of Redis under the hood. But Redis is like, if you want to cache data in Heroku, for some instance, you can use Redis, or if you are like more like a SQL kind of a database, then you can use this Postgres. You can have tons of data there. And then Apache Kafka, it's on Heroku, right? So I'm contrasting the difference between Salesforce and Heroku, right, a bit. So in Salesforce, right, objects are pretty simple, point and click, and you build it. And it's very easy to build in Salesforce, like point and click and you go, right? But what I'm trying to convey here is you need to spend time doing your data model design. It's very critical part of your application design because everything stands on that. And you need to understand that metadata that you're creating in Salesforce has that dependency on those objects and stuff like that. So if you go wrong there, the probability of not having a scalable application is really high, right? And then I'm saying, okay, on the other hand, you have Heroku's data services as well. So in case, let's say, so one of the patterns that I want to show, so let's look at some of the patterns. So try to search for modern app development, and modern app development on Salesforce, and look for patterns, right? So one of the things that we published was, let's see, sorry, one sec. Okay. Yeah, so this is the blog post that I wrote about all of these, right? So feel free to read that. It's on our website, right? But there was a blog post that was really interesting to me, was on our developer blog itself, where they say, okay, modern app development with low and pro code patterns, right? So here, if you look at okay, what you can do with Heroku is like cross org visibility architecture. Like for example, if you have a multiple org, right, you can actually get all of the data within within the Heroku Postgres one single table. That's so powerful, because now you can actually do an analytics with all the data that is there, right? The other pattern that I saw was cross org data synchronization, right? Let's say you have two orgs and you want to synchronize data against them, right? There is this pattern where what you can do is you can actually use Heroku to do that. Similarly, low-code patterns, like for example, let's say you're writing an API, you can host it on Heroku, right? And all of these actually have, if you go look at it, right, all of these actually have a Medium post on our architect website, where they actually talk you through step-by-step implementations for them. Like everything here has a blog post that you can actually read. And these are the patterns that are, and these are the patterns, like somebody asked a question, right? Hey, how do we, where do we bring this Heroku into architecture, right? These are the use cases, like really use cases where you want scalability. Like for example, you are building an API itself, that's going to be consumed by Salesforce and other applications as well. Now you can build that on Heroku, as an open spec API. Or let's say, you're bringing data from multiple Salesforce org and you want to take analytics out of the data, right? So you can use Heroku Postgres for that, where you can bring in all the data and then the data is sitting in one Heroku Postgres table. Now you can write an analytics on top of it, right? Using Einstein AI tool or any other tool like Tableau, etc. Or cross-org data synchronization, right? If you have a requirement to synchronize data between two Salesforce environments, you can do that with Heroku. And one of the key ingredients is Heroku Connect. Now, Heroku Connect is one of our services, which, basically it's like, let's see, what is Heroku Connect, right? So Heroku Connect is one of our applications where what you do is you don't have to do yourself, do a lot of work of mapping and connecting to Salesforce, right? So Heroku Connect is a utility that Salesforce provides, where you can easily connect from Heroku to Salesforce just by doing clicks. And you basically say, okay, I want to connect to this Salesforce instance. So you provide the username, you provide the password, and then you say, okay, I want to map this table to this table in Salesforce, right? So you put your Postgres, like this is my Postgres table, this is my Salesforce table. You map and you are done. It will automatically take care of synchronizing between Salesforce and Heroku and Salesforce, right? Now, if you don't want to do this kind of, if you don't want to use Heroku Connect, Heroku Connect is also like dollars at cost, right? So some of us don't like to use that, and there are open source libraries like JS Force, which you can use to automatically sort of connect Salesforce to Heroku, or basically you can write your own custom integrations. And those examples are the ones that I'm going to be showing into the demo. So let's move on. So the other thing that I wanted to spend some time was where as a developers we go wrong, right? I'm a developer at heart, right? But I'm not a designer, okay? And one of the things that I made mistake in my career is whenever somebody gives me a requirement, right, which involves writing user interface, like in Salesforce, you can pretty much drag and drop and build certain things. But sometimes you need to go custom, right? That's where we were building Visual Force pages, like some years back. So when you build like Visual Force page or a Lightning Web Component or something like that, one of the mistakes that I did was I always just coded it right away, without like sketching it out, without talking to the investors, right? So there was no concept of this design, and that is so limiting way of approaching things. Like just writing the code and reiterating on that. That's not going to work when you are building something that is visual, right? If there are So first thing you should do is like use some tools. Like we have Sketch, right? Sketch, we have a plugin for Sketch for Salesforce Lighting Design System. So use that, and then build mockups. Before you build like a fully fledged application, build mockups so that everyone is aligned and you know exactly what you want to code, right? Writing code is the most expensive thing actually, in Salesforce or anywhere else, right? So that's why, like, designs you can iterate quickly, but not code. So that's something that I wanted to talk about. And then these things you already know. It's a web component. I don't want to spend much time because we're going to anyway go into the demo. And then this is where Salesforce platform shines, right? Like automation, right? If you want to automate your application, then Salesforce provides really tools like flows and Procode, right? So make use of it. And one of the ways you should actually think about these tools is, okay, don't just think about as a developer that, okay, I have a requirement, I just need to finish this requirement and get away with it, right? Always think in terms of, okay, who is going to maintain this application once I'm rolled off the project, right? At long term, who is going to use this, right? So depending on that, you should choose your tools so that it's easier to maintain and enhance and scale, okay? And then we have all of these wonderful APIs that Salesforce provides. That's the power of Salesforce, like API based, and that makes it exciting for building applications on Heroku connected to Salesforce, because now I have all these APIs, so I can access those APIs from Salesforce, right? From Heroku, I can access these APIs, okay? So enough of slides. Actually, let's actually move on to a demo, okay? And then we will see what, we'll come back and discuss some patterns and see how everything goes from here, okay? So let's see. So let's go and look at demo. Before that, any questions do we have?
Nope, we are good.
Okay, perfect. So the demo that I'm gonna do today is, again, everything is open source, and you can actually go to our Trailhead apps repo on GitHub. And that's where and I recommend you look at all of the applications, because I myself learned a lot from these applications and the code that we build. So the application that I picked today is eCars, and the reason why I picked up is because I've been maintaining this application. It's a showcase application for showing how to build a modern application, right? So it uses Heroku, it uses Kafka, it uses Salesforce, it uses things like change data capture, Lightning Web Components, both within the platform, outside the platform, right? So this application, again, it has, as you can see, a lot of the code is JavaScript. So that actually shows where we are headed in terms of Salesforce actual development, right? You will be surprised that if you just know Apex and don't know JavaScript, in next 3-4 years your skills might be a little outdated as a Salesforce developer, because we have Salesforce functions safe harbor coming, which is going to support JavaScript, TypeScript, and for writing applications on Heroku, you need JavaScript and Node. Of course, you can use Java and other languages, but no Apex there. Just note that. And also, if you are building tools like Salesforce CLI plugins, or if you are building a Visual Studio Code extension, all of them is written in JavaScript and TypeScript. So you see the importance of the language shift that we are slowly going towards, right? you want to be a full stack developer, you will have to learn JavaScript. It's become JavaScript. And the thing about Node.js, which excites me, is Node.js runs everywhere. Like you can run it on your microcontroller to, on your, on your server to on your browser, right? Again, Node.js is JavaScript, right? So if you compile a JavaScript out of it, again, there will be server specific modules, but that's the stuff, right? Like, Node.js is like quite popular, used everywhere, and that's why it is so exciting as a language. And your skills are like now broadened if you learn that language. So this is what this application is built. Now let's actually see how I deployed this application. So last night I spent around like 20-30 minutes getting this to deploy. So we have really simplified the deployment experience. Of course, you can go to manual deploy and follow all these steps to deploy to your it will require a Heroku environment and also Salesforce environment. So you can actually go and manually do all of these actually. What we have done, interestingly, is we have sort of made it very easy for anyone to deploy. That is, it automatically creates a Salesforce scratch arc, pushes all the Salesforce related code, creates Heroku instances, pushes all the Heroku code. I'll show you the architecture for this. So what this application does is, so I'm going to show you a demo. I will going to talk. So basically, it uses Heroku for doing a couple of heavy lifting things. For example, creating a PDF. And also, it streams all the data. So we assume that there are this is e-cars is a fictitious car manufacturer. So all the cars have their own batteries and other devices like IoT devices. So they are all streaming data. And we have written a service using Mqtt Broker app. So we push all the service to the Service Cloud in Salesforce. And then it combines with both, say, Salesforce and there's a custom card configurator. I'm going to show you all of these now. But so the interesting thing that I wanted to talk about here is if you go to, so I have this application in my, let's clear this. So I have this application running in my Salesforce environment. I'm going to show you, but let's look at the repository first, right? So what do we have? So Force app, everyone is familiar with it. If you know Salesforce, you're familiar with it. It's all Salesforce metadata, right? Like the application, the flows, the layouts, the LWC, right? And then the objects, etc., like all the objects that are there, the permission sets that we have. Everyone is familiar with that because they know Salesforce development, right? We have some sample data here for pushing the data, right? But what is interesting is, see this app folder? Okay, what is this app folder all about? So these are 4 specific Heroku applications. So if I go to my Heroku instance, this is where those applications are. If I go to this, so you see there are 4 different applications. So one of the application is a UI, like a custom front-end facing application called eCards PWA. PWA stands for Progressive Web App. I'll talk about it now. So Progressive Web App is it's an installable app. I'll show you what is a Progressive Web App. It provides something called a service worker where you can really, you can do offline. And then with service worker, there are so many things you can do like caching. And you can install them actually on your desktop, on your desktop or on your phone, right? So that's one part of the application. The other part of the application is services, right? So there are 2 services that we have built. One is PDF service, which basically generates that PDF and sends to Salesforce. And the other service is web push notifications. That again uses a node-based module where what we do is we push a notification from Salesforce to the browser. I'll show you how it works. And then we have a real-time. So let's look into Mqtt Broker. So then we have this broker. Okay, so broker is basically, again, I showed you that service use case, right? So I'm going to show you the examples of that. Then we have some services. So I talked about. Then we have this real-time services. Like we have, so we have created our own modules. So we don't have real cars here, right? So we have created our own node modules that's going to simulate the behavior of as if the car is like sort of sending the battery signals, etc. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the demo, and then we'll come back and relate the code. But before we look at the demo, what I want you to pay attention to was that scripts folder, and look at eCar_deploy. So you should look at this file, and this is where we have this whole thing automated. Like it's creating the scratch arcs, it's creating the scratch arcs, and then just give me a sec here. It's somebody's pinging me. Okay, so yeah, so you can create the scratch arcs, you can create the Heroku environments, right? So one of the common questions that we ask, okay, is it like creating Heroku apps is like, okay, you say new app, create app, and you go through the setup menu, right? True, but actually, you can automate all of these, right? Like Heroku CLI. So this script uses both Heroku CLI, Salesforce CLI, and automates it. So look at the script. Actually, we use something called a shell.js so that we can execute all of the commands. Like, for example, the scratch arc creation command. There should be one for scratch arc, right? So run the script. Actually, I recommend you run the script. So this has the ability to create scratch arcs. Then we create Heroku environments, and then we deploy all of these codes. So you see, we are setting up the Heroku config variables. We are pushing the Heroku code or deploying the code, right? So everything is automated. That's why you see like, okay, to create this app, all that you need to do is run this 4 set of instructions. You need a dev hub because you need a scratch arc, right? And then basically you Heroku login, and then you clone, you cd into this script folder, you run the script folder, and that's about it. At last you'll have to maybe set a couple of config variables that your terminal will give you advice for. But yeah, it takes like 15 minutes. It will run, or maybe less than that. It takes 10 minutes, and it does all the setup for you, so that we know that this is the automation level that you can achieve. Okay, so let's look at the demo, right? So let's see if the instances are running. So Heroku has this free instances, and that's what I'm using. And one of the capabilities of Heroku is in the free instances there is a sleep time. That means if you're not using the instances, it goes to sleep, and that happens only for the free instance. Okay, not for an instance that you might have purchased for production purposes. So it goes for sleep. So we have to wake it up basically by making a request. I think it is awake because I can see this application running. So again, notice this application is the one of the Heroku apps. It's a web application, right? I'll talk about how we build this. This is built using Lightning Web Components. So the same technology that you use on Salesforce platform, we just use it to build a web application, right? So you can, so Kishore, what car do you like? And like, what range should we order a car for you?
A long range, yeah, for sure.
Okay. And what is your favorite color actually?
Black.
Okay, there you go.
Nice.
Okay, and then what about your interiors? Like, what type of interiors you like?
Lavish.
Okay, this one.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Black,
Oh,
black. All
okay.
blacks.
Oh, there you go. Okay, and so this is again an application built using. So this one we are ordering for Kishore. Kishore, what's your last name? I'm gonna put Kishore.
It's BT.
Okay. And then just gonna put some phone numbers. Let's just put your email. I'm just gonna put mine for time being. Okay, seems like I have probably created a lead. Maybe let's execute this in another browser and see how it works. Okay, this is much better. Okay, so let's pick up the ranges. Let's pick up you said this one, right? So next, let's pick this. So let's say Kishore, right? Last name, phone number, of course, not real numbers. So we're gonna say, okay, contact me. So what happens now when I say contact me? It should pop up. Okay, so I need to give a permission. Okay, because I'm running this in incognito mode, I need to give some permissions. So we have strictly restricted the permissions here. Sure. Okay, let's unsubscribe for a time being. Okay, let's do it here. Okay, so let's say Kishore, we want to contact Kishore here. Contact me. Okay, so what happened is, let's go to our Salesforce environment. So this is a Heroku application, right? So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and open the Salesforce instance. So we should see a lead created in Salesforce from Heroku. So this is the Salesforce environment, and you know the leads module in Salesforce, right? So we go here and say leads. Let's look at lead. Hope all the leads are there. Okay. So there it is. So this is the lead that we just created, right? So this is the lead that we just created. There's a lead that got created. And so how are we doing this, right? How are we, so some of you might ask the question, okay, how are we integrating from this application to Salesforce, right? So let's look at some of the architectural diagrams that we have here. So the lead insertion, there you go. So this is the architecture diagram that I put together so that it's easier to understand, right? So what we do is we have an Express server that's running on Heroku. And what we do is we actually call the API, the graph API, the composite graph API, so that we can take all those options that Kishore just mentioned us and create all the data in Salesforce. Like we create the lead, we create his car configurations, his options, right? So we do all of them and sort of create it inside Salesforce. So let's look at the code a bit and demystify a bit for you. So essentially, as I said, right, all the Heroku apps are here. So let's go to the eCars progressive web app. So the source folder. So we have two different things. A client. The client is like the web application that is served over HTTP, right? The server is where we are building the APIs, right? So one of the APIs that we did was these APIs, like lead insertion, right? So here it is, right? So we built an API called, so if you look at this function, this must be called somewhere. So here, create subscription, right? So if you look at this is an API. This is a module called create subscription, right? Which basically uses the graph API. And graph API is the latest addition to our bunch of APIs, right? So you can basically have multiple objects and send it, right? So with the graph API, we can actually push the data into Salesforce. So with this, we just push the data into Salesforce. Again, how are we logging into Salesforce, etc.? By using JSForce. So JSForce is a common, like what do you call it? So JSForce is a NPM module that makes it easier to work with Salesforce. So all that you need to do is create a new JSForce connection, provide the login URL with all of these credentials. So you say connection.login, and you're logged in basically. So with that, you log into Salesforce, you push the data, right? And then we have the client application. Again, the client application is simple. It's just an HTML. But the interesting thing that you need to know is it's a what is this? This is a Lightning web component, right? So if you say UX is, so if you go to our modules, UX is the folder name, and app is where this entire component is sitting. So if you go to app HTML, right? So you have our page header, we have the car configurator component. So from here, it is very similar code that you are used to. That is, it's a Lightning web component. So you go to car configurator, you see, your Lightning web components, and all of these are actually powered by that an application called. You should actually look at this if you're building a website or something using LWC, right? Where did it go? Okay, so if you're building an application like LWC, yeah, so if you're building an application like LWC, look at this Lwc Create App. So this was created by Rene, a team member here. And this application is really good because what it does is it allows you to scaffold a project, a project like let's say a website, or you're building a progressive web app or an Electron app, anything that you'd like to build with web components, it provides a scaffolding tool, and it uses a bundler called Webpack. So it's time to explore all those technologies. But really, one thing that I wanted to like show you here was, the way we actually use. So there is a thing called, there should be a thing called service worker here. Let's see. There you go. So this is the service worker file, right? So service worker is actually, so we're using our tool called Workbox. Basically, it's an NPM module for handling caching and other things. So essentially, this is what happening in the code is like, basically, yeah. So here, right, so when you push the notification, you can do that because of this file, service worker file. And the service worker needs to be in the root of your web server, right? So like, for example, if I inspect this and go to sources, right? See, this is my service worker. So this is my service worker. It's all minified at this point, but you get the idea, right? So yeah, so go look at this. We also did some YouTube videos on me and Julian, one of my coworker, a good friend. So we did like, how do we build this application, like a session. So if you're curious, you can go explore it. But really, from this point, right, what we can do is we can push notification. Like, for example, I can say, hey, Kishore, your car is ready. Your order is ready to showroom, things like that, right? So I can send this notification. Hopefully the instance is up and running. We should see that notification. Okay, it's timed out because I know the instance might, oh, there you go. Oh, sorry, what was the notification here? Okay, I think it timed out because, there you go. So it's, for some reason, it's hiding the notification. I guess that is, again, one of my security settings somewhere, where it's like, let's send it once more. See, the notifications are coming, show all. There you go. Hey, Kishore, your order is ready, right? So one of the things I forgot to show about is you can actually go install this application. So I say install this. So this is going to be installed. So you see, so that is the PWA, right? A PWA is an application that can be installed on your local machine or your server, right? So that's the beauty of PWA, is like, you can install. Now it's on my machine, it's part of the Chrome apps now. I can easily just boot it up anytime that I want. It's sitting on my phone, on my desktop. So again, this is not possible to build these kind of applications on Salesforce directly because you don't have access to the server, right, to add your service worker. But on Heroku, this is possible, and that's my point. Is like, okay, if you're building something like really modern, you can mix both the technologies, right? Like here, it's a simple web client that's running on your browser or on your phone or on your desktop, right? But the data is actually going into Salesforce, right? So for example, let's send one more notification here and see what happens. There you go. You see, right? So that's the power, right? A service agent can send, and this can be received, right? And it sits now. I don't have to, like, for example, I can close my where's the browser application? It's gone, right? So the browser application is gone, but like, I can boot this application anytime by just clicking on this, right? We can place another order, like a red car this time. Anyway, so that is the power of Heroku, right? Like, you can use the web technology of your choice. There's no like opinionated thing here. But the interesting thing was we used the same technology, like Lightning Web Components, outside the platform. Okay. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is, okay, so let's see what else can we do with this application. So we go to the car options. So this is the car options. There should be a PDF button somewhere. Let's see. Maybe it's in the car options. be the PDF button. Let's see. Let's go back to lead. So there should be something. So we have card configurations. Give me a sec. Let me figure it out where we kept that button. It's been a long since I've like played with this application. Let's see. Should be, so this is the car options. Okay, car options. Okay, let's see. Maybe we go to car configurator. Okay, let's go back to car configurator. So it's the same component that is running here, right? We can run within Salesforce as well. Again, this is the same Lightning component that is there. So let's try to do a PDF order from here. So again, so we can search for that lead, right, and generate a PDF. So I'm going to say PDF, right? So again, it is, so when I clicked on that PDF button, what it is doing is it actually called the Heroku service, and Heroku service actually generated the PDF record or the PDF, and it actually sent the data back to Salesforce and attached it to this. So for example, when I click on here, right, so you see, so this PDF generation is happening asynchronously. Notice it's not happening in Salesforce context. It was all done by Heroku application. So we have this PDF service, right? So if you go to, so this was the PWA, but if you go to the services app, we go to PDF, right? So we are using a third-party library called, what is our library? So the library is called, where is our library? It's one of the, again, it's one of the open source library that we use. I think if you go to package.json, we should be able to easily find it. Let's go back to package.json here. Yeah, so all the dependencies. So we are using a library called PDF Make here, right? So PDF Make is again a library that's a node library that actually allows you to create PDF on server, right? So that is the power of Heroku. It's like you are free to use any other node module, unlike Salesforce, where we are like really opinionated to some stuff, right? So you see the power that we are getting here, right? We are able to do heavy lifting on Heroku, right? So like PDF service, right? So we are able to do that. This is the diagram that I put together, right? So it's an LWC and Apex, and we invoke the PDF service, right, from the Apex. And then what happened was the PDF Make service actually logged into Salesforce, it queried the lead record, it created that PDF, created the file record, or the content document link records. Okay, you can actually explore the code yourself, because again, the code is all open source, and if you have any questions, just let us know, but it should be straightforward. It's a TypeScript application. The other thing is we use TypeScript here, which actually compiles into JavaScript. So really, we provide some services, like, again, it's using the same JS Force, logs in, gets the lead, and then saves the PDF to the lead by creating the content version and the content document link. Okay, so that, right? And then actually, what else can we show here? Let's go back to our application. Okay, so there was one more use case that I was talking about, right? So when we go to the cases, let's open one of the cases here. So battery diagnostic, I'm gonna say last 50 mile. Okay, there you go. Again, we have helps as well here, right? So let's pause and resume this. So essentially what we are doing here is, again, streaming the data, right, from that service, right, in Heroku directly into Salesforce. And we are using Chart.js to actually show those data sets. Again, it's all open source. You can explore the code, but let's see what else we can do here. So I don't know if that service is actually running. Let's see. So so the one was for the PWA, right? So this was for the PWA. This application was for what? So this application was, okay, this was for the push notification. This is the MQTT. Basically, this is the MQTT stuff. It should be running. I think it's running. So it should be sending some data, hopefully. Modern application development. Okay, so you get the idea, right? So again, as I said, right, with Heroku, you can host the services, you can write your Node.js application, you can stream the data into Salesforce, and all of these services are here for you to explore. All of them. So again, in one folder, we have compiled all of them, and we are using Node.js to power up everything. The other one uses MQTT actually, and we put together an architecture diagram for that. This one, right? So this is how that real-time service from Heroku is actually reaching into Service Cloud in Salesforce. So basically, we have a DB like we've created. So this DB, eCars DB, this is essentially a table basically, which is mimicking or basically sending events. And then we use WebSockets to send. So if you look at that detail page, it is using a WebSocket. So somebody was asking, okay, how do I implement the WebSocket with Lightning Web Components, right? So look into this class, right? So you see we are receiving this over a WebSocket. So this is the WebSocket, like WSS is WebSocket actually. So this is the Heroku application, right? RT Spring Meadow. Which was that? Let's see, RT Spring Meadow 87, right? So this is the application, right? So we are connecting to this application from Salesforce using the WebSocket. Okay, and all of the code is here for you to explore. So there's a lot of code here. We actually did a couple of YouTube session, like modern app development on Salesforce. So I recommend you actually go there and see. We actually go deep into the architecture and the code, deep dive into that. Now, any questions before we actually move on here?
There are a couple of them. So let me start with, okay. Does the deploy.js script deploy all the 4 applications in the Heroku along with the deploy objects in the Salesforce Scratchbox?
Correct. Yeah, it does that.
Cool. Okay. And do we need a separate licenses for connecting Heroku app and Salesforce, or we need to
No,
configure integration with?
no, JS Force. So JS Force is an open source library. So I showed you, right? So we have the JS Force. You can search for JS Force in our repo, right? So we use JS Force. This is an open source library. Basically, it allows you to, it provides a small little function called login. So you can use that login to essentially log in into Salesforce. Like, for example, this is the code that I was showing, right? It's like require JS Force, and then you say JS Force dot connection, and you provide the username. You say connection dot login, username, password, the token, and you're logged in. Now, this is not the right way, a secure way to do it using username and password. There's a better way to do it, like OAuth. You can do that actually using JS Force. JS Force has a lot of ways. Like, for example, if I say JS Force dot, so there must be an OAuth 2. So you can use the OAuth 2 basically. So you can use the OAuth 2. You have to provide the client secret and the client ID and all of the good stuff. Like, you have to provide the token URL, the client ID, the client secret, the redirect URL. So you'll need a connected app in Salesforce for that. But yeah, once you do that, like you should be able to connect, and no cost. So cost perspective, somebody asked, right? A lot of questions on cost, right? So go to Heroku and check pricing. Actually, Heroku, surprisingly, the Heroku pricing it depends on your runtime, unlike licenses in Salesforce. So it is not that expensive, honestly. Like, you can use this guided price estimator to calculate it. And for a realistic application like ours, right, it depends on how many consumptions you have, but I doubt it'll be more than like, $100 per month to run a fully functional application. Again, it depends on how much scalable, etc. you need. But yeah, unlike like Salesforce, right? It's not cost per user; it's per the runtime. So it's actually not expensive. But again, what Salesforce gives you is more than that. Like, it gives you all the authentication. You don't have to build authentication. You don't have to build your application security services, all of these, right? With Heroku, it's like the cost is reduced, but the development cost is like high because you have to build all of these. So, but if you're a developer, you'll definitely love working on Heroku because you can do a lot more interesting stuff. Okay.
Cool. Should we stick to next question? Should we stick to LWC for UI, or can we use any web applications like jQuery, React, Angular?
Anything, you can use anything. It's not, so we are using LWC because we want to use the same code. Like you saw that I was running the same stuff inside Salesforce, outside Salesforce, right? Or let's not say outside Salesforce because Heroku is also part of the Salesforce. But I was running it on on Heroku, right? The same thing, on my own web server. And I'm running the same component inside Salesforce because I don't want to use two different technologies because again I have to maintain two separate code and I can use the same code, right? So again, we are opinionated as a Salesforce to LWC, but you can run any technology, any web technology of your choice, basically.
Nice. And what is the use of Mqtt Broker?
Yeah, I unfortunately I didn't get a lot of time to actually look, go into MQTT and why we need that, right? So let's talk a bit about MQTT, right? And you can actually Google MQTT. You'll find a lot more better information that I give. But essentially, it's a open source protocol for IoT devices. So let's say I have an IoT device like my Fitbit watch or something like washing machine, or let's imagine a sensor or something like that, right? So IoT devices are different compared to normal applications, because in applications you don't have so much of data, while in IoT devices the data is like equivalent to time. Like every second you are capturing some other data, right? Like for example, if I'm running in this application, I have a car, I have a battery, and the battery is actually giving me its life whenever it's running. So there's continuous flow of data, from my car sensors and from my car battery through an IoT device, right, over the internet. So Internet of Things, right, IoT. So MQTT protocol is basically designed to make that communication easier between your application layer and that device. Okay. So as you can see, essentially what happens is you have a client, you have a broker, right, and then you have a subscriber and the backend, right? So it's like, just give me a sec. I have to open the door for someone.
So, guys, how is the session? Uh, so, do you guys learning something new, or is it all old stuff? How is it, guys?
It's all
Yeah, go
over the
ahead,
head.
Mod. Yeah,
I was like, it's all over the head, I guess.
it's great. Nice.
Yeah, but see, the reality is like, I'm not talking like, okay, you know your stuff, right? You're all Salesforce developers, you know Salesforce very well, right? Now we need to take our application to the next level, right? We need to take whatever we are building, we need to scale it, to a good extent and support all the use cases. So how do we do that, right? So we need to build patterns, we need to find out other technologies, right? Explore them. So that is the thing. Now if you're not understanding anything, there is nothing to worry about, right? Because all the code is open source, right? Like today, if you're like, okay, this is too much for me, right? Take a step back. Let's go back to basics, right? To make a habit of, okay, today I'm gonna just learn how to write an express server in Node. Next day I'm gonna learn how do I deploy this to Heroku application, right? Try to break the whole thing into like very small modules and go along. And if you're not understanding something, it's okay, as long as you're making some progress, because over the time you'll be like, okay, now I get all of these things, now I know what these folks have done in this code, right? And tomorrow, like if you're trying to build something of your own, you'll be like, okay, now I have something to get started with, so that's all my aim here.
Cool.
It's I agree. It's all over the head. Like, I won't be surprised, like as a Salesforce developer, is trying to get all this information. I know it's overwhelming, but at the same time, what I wanted to do was like, really give you an insight into, okay, how does the world look like from here on to Salesforce developers, right? Because we will move into that direction where you have to scale your orgs. Like, if you're in the old org, the challenges there. There's tons of process. How do we move some of these processes to something like a stateless server like Heroku, and how do we scale it? So things like that. How do we process large data volumes? So some of these patterns might help, right? So I was talking about MQTT, right? So it's basically a protocol, right? And there is a node implementation for that. So it's a MQTT Node.js, right? You will find a lot of npm libraries. You'll also find getting started guide. So we are using that same library called MQTT basically, so that we can simulate. So here it is, right? So in this example we show, like, we have a DB where we have the sensor data, right? So we have this event persistent object where what we are doing is, so MQTT Broker, like car is a sensor, right? Sensor for us is a random generator. So we have a JavaScript which randomly is just generating a data. And then we have this MQTT Broker, which basically is a broker. And then anything that goes out of this broker is actually either retained in this persistent module, or we pass it on to the connector. And then the connector publishes this over the raw web sockets. So it's continuously publishing data in the raw web socket. And what we are doing in the case detail pages, we have a Lightning Web component which actually listens that and then shows it using the chart.js. That's all it is doing. This is just a random number generator, or nothing like a real-time car, but we are trying to mimic. So it's a random generator. Yeah.
So it's primarily for IoT kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Just show that how you can use Heroku for streaming IoT data events. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and then we have this Apache Kafka, which I did not cover. So Apache Kafka is okay. So this architecture actually works, but if you need like more large scale things, right? Like for example, you have a bus where, okay, you saw this example, like where Salesforce is only one that is listening. Now tomorrow there are 100 more devices that are listening to something like this, right? Let's say there are centers, like help centers. Let's take an example of electric car manufacturer, right? And let's say they have their own service stations, and all of the service stations should receive this data, right? So they will have a receiver somewhere in across each of these service stations. So these service stations need to take that data or receive that data, along with this. So everyone cannot open a WebSocket. They might not even have a WebSocket. They might not even use browser. They're using a device, actual device. So that is where the Apache Kafka comes into picture, because with Apache Kafka, what you can do is you can like really create a producer and a consumer type of model. So you basically take all the events, create a topic, right? And the consumers can just subscribe to that topic. It's like publish pub sub model, right? So yeah. Okay.
Okay, next one. Do we need to write code separately if we need to give role or profile based access to the users in Heroku app?
Good question. Right. So whatever you saw, it's like anonymous integration user, right? I had one user. I basically had the username and password sort of coded into the environment variable of Heroku and connected with it, right? Tomorrow, let's say that, hey, you're providing a consumer face application, like what you do in Salesforce community. Again, it's Experience Cloud now. So in Salesforce Experience Cloud, right, you have end customers that can use your application, like B2C use case, right? Business to customer use case. So if you have an application like that, you will have to set up something like an OAuth, so that you can securely authenticate. Every user can authenticate themselves to this web application. So with that, what will happen is the context. So you don't have to worry about profile and permission sets. They're all managed within Salesforce. And because you have OAuth from Heroku into Salesforce, that token, right, has that context. So it will not be able to access any data that your user is not supposed to do that, because now it runs in the user context. It's no more running in that integration context, right? So yeah, when you have to basically do an OAuth between Salesforce and Heroku, and once you do that, you get the session context. So all the permissions are managed in Salesforce. You get the session, right? And that session is locked down. It's secure session because it can only do what your permissions are there in Salesforce.
Okay, so the next one, for the Salesforce data, we are accessing via REST API, and that will be managed by Salesforce. But the data we are storing in Heroku, the security, we will have to manage it by our own. The security when we are storing the data in Heroku, yeah.
Yes, yes. If you are storing the data in Heroku, right, you will have to manage that. If there is a security requirement, right, then you have to manage it such a way that nobody is able to actually query your data other than you yourself, right? So you might have to put that ID or have an identifier identified for your user, use that in your table, and basically say, okay, always when you're querying, you have the filter of that user ID, right? So you definitely have to do that if you have the requirement. And that's why I'm saying, modern application development should not, typically, if you don't have a use case for storing data in Heroku, you should not store that data. Like, for example, we are not storing any data. Like we saw I shared you 4 use cases, right? Or 3 use cases. We are not storing, except for one where we are storing some keys for the subscription, right? Other ways, we are not storing any data in Heroku, like the leads that you saw. It's just a form. You enter the data. We don't store that in Heroku. It comes into Salesforce, right? You saw that Mqtt use case where we publish the data into the what do you call it? So with Mqtt, we publish the data, but we are not, again, there's a persistent thing that we saw in this architecture. We can take this out if you want, and it's unsecure. Like, events, this data, right? It's not like a secure information. It's not somebody's password, or it's not somebody's passport number, or etc. Right? It's just an event. It's just the vehicle ID and the stuff. So we can persist those kind of data if you want in Heroku. But if you have a requirement to say, okay, you don't have to, you cannot store data within Heroku, just take it out. You don't need the stuff. You're directly streaming to Salesforce, right? Similarly, here, the PDF example that I've shown you, right? We send all the information, right? We say we kick it off. Heroku actually queries the data. Again, it never stores. It does the computing, and then it creates that file and then sends back to Salesforce. It's not storing any data, right? So that is what it means by serverless. So serverless means basically, it's not storing any data. It's a stateless application. It's just storing some keys that it can connect to Salesforce, and that's about it. You're not storing. So yeah.
Okay, the last one. So can we use React or Angular inside Salesforce instead of LWC?
Inside Salesforce?
Yeah.
I mean, you can using Visual Force page, not using,
Yes.
etc. But why would you do that? I mean, so the question is like, why would you want to do that way? Now that LWC is like mature. But if I understand there might be a use case where you're like, okay, I want to, I have something, already written in Angular, and it's like, okay, now it takes a lot of time to reconstruct that application. If that's the use case, right? So, then it's pretty simple. What we can do in that case is use Visual Force as a workaround, right? So the thing about using or mixing the third-party libraries with LWC is your life cycles get complex, and it's very difficult to actually handle them. So that's why I recommend that you use a Visual Force container to do that kind of stuff. And a lot of applications are using that way. They have their React application inside Salesforce. They're usually a Visual Force page exposed as a tab.
Okay. So the last one. In OAuth, should we store the user records in Heroku, just like in Salesforce, what we have?
Yeah, that is a good question, right? So if you're using an OAuth, right, definitely you're storing some user details like user ID and the OAuth access token, etc. So what I recommend, and this interestingly, I was building an application, something along those lines, and I was like thinking, okay, okay, now I have to store data, right? At least the tokens, etc. So you can actually store in the Postgres database, but one thing you can do to make it more secure is encrypt using the private key. You can have a private key in the environment variable and encrypt that token when you store in Salesforce. So yeah, you might store something like okay, user ID. I'm not going to store anything else, right? Like name. Let's say that is so much compliant, and I don't want to store the name, last name, etc. What I'll do is I'll just store the Salesforce ID and then encrypted access token and encrypted refresh token, and that's about it. I'm storing only a few things, right? There's no name, there's nothing, and it's very difficult to hack it because it's all encrypted, right? If somebody like gets hold of the database and tries to get the access token, they can't do anything with it because it's encrypted, unless they hack the the private key that I was talking about, which is an environment variables. Well, if they're hacking the private key, then there is a bigger problem. It's a bigger thing that they have done. They have basically hacked everything that's there on the Heroku database at that point. So
So, have we ever faced such kind of a scenario in Heroku? No, I don't think so.
no, no,
Cool. So that the developers are aware what to build and where to give the security concepts. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Finally, like couple of more stuff, right? When you're building, so one of the things we constantly advise is when you're building applications in Salesforce, always have this stuff, right? Whether you are doing an org-based development, package-based development, now is the time to actually think about package-based development, because as I said, if you try to build everything in one monolith app, it's not going to scale. So if you're building a custom platform application, try to do a package-based development, especially using unlock packages. If you're not an ISV vendor, if you're an ISV vendor, you know that you're already using packages, so no worries there. But if you're like customizing core cells, then yeah, our development makes sense. And then automation, right? If you look at how we build this application, right? We followed the branching strategy. Like every developer has a branch, and then we submit a PR, like pull request. Like as you can see here, it gets reviewed by someone, right? It's get reviewed by someone. Let's see if I can actually authenticate into it. So someone is enhancing the application, right? We can see, we can look at it, we can look at the code, and then approve it. Then there is a pipeline which basically runs the CI/CD automation. So try to automate your deployments, your workflows, etc. To basically get um, more out of it, like so that you know what you're actually doing. There's a review process in place, etc. So that's why I was mentioning source driven development, right? Use Git, use source, so that things can be reviewed, can be looked at, it can be reverted back, and have a CI/CD pipeline sort of building it, right? So yes, so that's the stuff. Yeah, so any more questions? I think we spent like what, 1.5 hours discussing all of these. It's interesting. Hello, Kishore, you're there?
Okay. Yes. There are like a couple of two questions, and then I'll ask one. According to W3, that is the W3 schools, W3C, web component is a base of LWC, React, and Angular. In order to React in Salesforce, similar to LWC in Salesforce, do we have any special configurations needed in config.js?
Yeah, I kind of did not get the question here. Basically, I think what someone is trying to do is like, is there a specification? So the thing about LWC is it's an open source project in itself. So you can go to this lwc.dev. You can basically visit their GitHub. So it is built using open source, right? So this is open source project. So to look at it, so again, it's based out of, or it's based on top of, it's a sugar on top of web components. While React and Angular are not like that, but they do also have web component specific support. But again, I request that do not mix all of them. If you are like really building applications on Salesforce native. Just use Lightning Web Components. Pretty straightforward to work with, pretty easier to maintain. If you're like, if you already have an application in Angular or something that you want to continue working, just use Visualforce and iframe it inside Salesforce, or essentially use Visualforce for the security purposes.
Okay, the next one. What is second generation managed package?
Well, that's a very good question. So 2GP versus 1GP, right?
2 GPs, yes, 1 GB, yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole topic in itself. So second generation package. So first generation package, if you are an ISV vendor, that means you provide apps on Salesforce App Exchange. So if you go to like appexchange.salesforce, right? This is where you build your application, publish it on the App Exchange store, and various orgs can install it, right? So these applications are managed package, right? So earlier we had this concept of 1GP, I mean first generation package. So those packages were like, the way the packages were built was, you have something called as packaging org. A packaging org is nothing but a developer org where you can create a namespace. You can do that today as well. So you package the package out of that org and essentially publish on the App Exchange. There's a whole process for that. I don't want to get into that. But the problems that we had with 1GP, one's first generation packages was, it's not source driven. Your packages are like org based. That is, you need to get into the org, you need to create a package out of that. So that was the first problem. The second problem was, it was really hard to build dependent packages, meaning, if I'm building a really good application of like, which has lots of code, I want to break them into multiple packages. You can do that with extension packages in first GP, but they were really not possible. And there were some more limitations there. Like, for example, you need to make your class global to share among the packages, right? You cannot have two packages with the same namespace. You need, the namespaces need to be different actually. So there were a lot of limitations like that, and that's where 2GP came in. So with 2GP, you are source based, not org based. Like, it's all command line. You can build your package out of the Git repo. And also the thing about 2GP is, you can have multiple packages with the same namespace. Same namespace packages can actually call each other's Apex class, like the classes which are in public. And the other thing is flexible versioning. Like, for example, you can have package and package versions, and you can branch out of them. Like today, the branching was linear with one generation. Linear meaning like, okay, 0.1 version, 0.2, now 0.3, right? It's very linear. With 2GP, what you can do is you can branch off that, right? For example, if you want to maintain two different branches altogether, there's a whole concept of like package ancestry and stuff like that. It's all well documented actually in our documentation. There's also a trail mix for ISVs, 2GP trail mix for ISV app, Salesforce. I recommend that you actually go through that. Yeah, so you will find a lot of them in Trailhead. There's a whole documentation around 2GP. Give a read. What is the comparison? Some of them I mentioned, right? The package versions are linear and branching, etc. But yeah, more flexibility. That's what it is all about. More flexibility in terms of how you can deliver apps. In short, that's what 2GP gives. You should actually think of moving towards 2GP if you are building a new package. If you are thinking of building a new package, then yeah, 2GP is the way to go, because that's the future, right? But if you're trying to convert 1GP to 2GP, you'll have to wait for some time, because Salesforce is working on giving a tool that can help you convert 1GP to 2GP, safe harbor. Yeah.
Nice. We started with scalable to ending with ISPs.
Yeah, exactly. We pretty much covered what is modern app development.
Everything. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So any more questions? I see no questions. Much interesting. Being virtual session, it has helped people irrespective of geography. Thanks for this. Nice.
No worries.
Okay, Mohit, how was your, uh, I mean, like, how did you like the session from your side? How was the
Yeah,
questions?
questions were really good, right? And again, as I said, right, like what I envision towards this session. Like, again, this is not specific topic, right? We are not talking about anything specific here. It's a very general topic I picked up, and yeah, what I wanted with this session was to give an idea to the developers, like, okay, where we are in this today, right, in terms of development on Salesforce. As you can like clearly see that barrier that we had, like, okay, Salesforce development was a specialized skill. We all know that, right? Salesforce, it's not easy to build applications on. It's easy to build applications on Salesforce, but like managing everything and building it, like getting that specific product knowledge and building, it's one of our core strengths, right? But the lines of actual, like, okay, actual developer and Salesforce developer is getting to blur now. That means, is Salesforce platform is going to open up for everyone else. Like, if somebody is a Node.js developer, right, once we have Salesforce functions, they can really contribute to our Salesforce ecosystem. Similarly, Salesforce developers, right, have a path here. It's not just that they've just learned Apex development and LWC development and end of the world for them, right? It's an open path towards becoming a generic cloud developer. That's what the term that I often like is, like, okay, Salesforce developers are not just specialized developers that can work on Salesforce. Of course we can work on Salesforce, but it's not that we don't understand the other world around us, right? We are generic cloud developers that can work with technology that we love, and that we like. So to make that happen, right, you have to like really open up your mind and sort of go towards Node.js development, sort of a thing. Learn JavaScript and Node and all those new technologies that are coming. So yeah, pretty exciting actually. And yeah, thank you for staying with me here, like 1.5 hour on your Saturday weekend.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, it started from 7 o'clock and then it's almost like 8:40 now. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. And Mohit, I would like to have you again in our group with with a specific topic and then with a specific agenda, like what we're doing. And then people are more interested to know, like, okay, we let's bring Mohit for one more time. So let's
Sure.
see.
Work it out. Something.
Let's work it out. Cool.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much.
guys.
Thank
And
you.
one last thing, we have next session from John. So he's going to take care of, I mean, like, he's going to talk about admin to architect. When I say architect, it is CTA, achieving the CTA goal. So let's see. As a developer, we are like developer from heart, but we want to know, like, how did he achieve the CTA? I mean, like, CTA is like a pride moment for everyone, right? So even all everybody from here, whoever it is, including Mohit, everyone
Yeah,
wants to be a CTA, right?
I
So let's see how did he prepare for his exam, or how what did he tackle? Because CTA is more of development or more of architecture, but admin skills, how did he engage and how did he get the CTA title at end of the day? So, okay. Thank you so much, guys. And let's meet in the next week on the next session with John. Thanks,
thank you.
Mohammed.
Yeah.
See ya. Bye, guys.
Bye.